Insemmilkom, sinjuri, grazzi li qed issegwu il-programm illum. Fit-8 ta' Ġunju se jsiru l-elezzjonijiet tal-Parlament Ewropew u tal-Kunsilli Lokali. Illum se niltaqgħu ma' żewġ kandidati tal-Parlament Ewropew u għalhekk l-ewwel mistiedna tiegħi hija Dr. Louise Police. L-intervista sa ssir bil-lingwa Ingliża biex aħna nkunu nistgħu inleħqu il-messaġġ tagħna lil kulħadd. Thank you very much, Louise, for joining our program.
Always a pleasure meeting up with you.
How's your campaigning going?
It's going okay. I get mixed feelings from people. There are people so desensitized because the situation has become so toxic that they don't want to hear anything about politics. There are some who think the situation is beyond repair. So they just... they don't want anything to do as well. And there are those who are still hopeful. I always say, listen, a cup which is half empty is also half full. So it's a matter of perspective. If you want to build up courage, if you want to build up hope, you should see the half full, not the half empty. We're all the time bombarded with social media, with lots of disinformation and lots of scandals. And this is having a negative impact on politics. However, I cannot emphasize enough that politics emphasize every aspect of your life. If you're stuck in traffic, if you have sewage coming out in a bay, so you can swim, if you're not getting good services at departments with housing, or if you're being offered third country services at our national hospital. These are all symptoms of bad governance. Democracy is also under attack, and we have to protect it because democracy is very fragile. With the rise in far right, the rise in populism, we have a problem. And this is what I would like to work on, the protection of democracy and the protection of the rule of law.
What would your main priorities be should you be elected as an MEP?
My topmost priorities are three. First of all, why protect democracy? Why protect the rule of law? They are enshrined in the treaty of the European Union, but the rise in far right, the rise in populism, and the rise in dictatorial governments means that democracy is under attack, rule of law is under attack. And where there is an attack on democracy, there is a rise in injustice. And when there is injustice, there is always suffering of the people. It's always the people that suffer. So we need more mechanisms, more enforcement mechanisms against states which are not compliant. At the moment, there's only two sanctions, forfeiture of the right to vote and forfeiture of financing. But these are not enough. We need more enforcement mechanisms in order to keep countries compliant because we need to protect all European citizens.
Why, in your opinion, are people reluctant to vote? And what are the repercussions of that?
Educational programs like Erasmus, studying abroad, job opportunities abroad, these are all taken for granted. But if it weren't for the EU, these will not be available. So no, don't take things for granted. Even financing, which has helped a lot of road restructuring, it has helped the infrastructure, maintenance of the ports, regenerations. And the EU should not be seen as something distant. The EU has laws, and these laws have to become applicable in Malta. So it's important to be active and to be informed also about what the EU is doing, because regulations and directives will obviously affect our country.
You mentioned education and the Erasmus program. Can we focus on the younger generation? And this is the generation that have only known Malta as being part of the EU.
We are a very small island, and we tend to be very insular. So the fact that you go abroad and experience life abroad from a very young age, it helps you grow and open up your perspectives and point of view even about life itself.
You're a lawyer by profession. Can we perhaps talk about the event that somebody has a case in the local courts and needs to seek further redress in the European courts? What's the process like? Is it easy?
We have to distinguish between the European Court of Justice and the ECHR, the European Court on Human Rights, because the European Court on Human Rights is the European Council. It's not part of the EU. I mean, it's not under the treaties of the EU. So after you go through all the process locally, then you can apply to the European Court on Human Rights. That's for breach of fundamental human rights. The European Court of Justice, it's very different. Usually it's not there that individuals go to, but the ECHR. And we've got a lot of judgments against Malta. Fundamental human rights. So we don't have a very good track record. We've got also a lot of bad certificates, like the noisiest in Malta, the most obese children, the biggest admission rate for asthma and respiratory diseases. These are not good certificates.
I have to also mention syphilis.
Yes, sexually transmitted diseases as well. We're the European country with the biggest increase in emissions. These are all symptoms of bad governance. So anyone who wants change can actually help for that change by voting. People say, listen, it's my right. It's also a duty. It's a duty towards your country, towards yourself, and towards future generations. If we want to safeguard future generations, if we want to safeguard our youths, we need to vote. We need to change.
How do the European elections tie in with the local elections? They're happening at the same time.
The purpose of local councils was to delegate power from Parliament. Delegation of powers means it's not the minister who's always on the pedestal, but for each locality there are powers allocated to that local council because the local council knows exactly the needs of that locality. What's happening is this government has centralized power again. It has seized powers from the local council and left them almost powerless. And now we have a problem, especially from the Labour side, of finding candidates. Because they want to do something better for their locality, they want to help their locality, but the powers have been taken away from them. And that is not good. And centralizing power is not good because each minister now has become a deity. We have a lot of false gods. We need to give them back their powers.
It's a long process.
Why should...
It's a long process to reverse something that's been done.
We need to give back the powers to the local councils, and we need to rebuild the systems that worked. Why should someone go begging for his rights? Not unjustified entitlement. We're talking about rights. Why should someone need to go begging to a minister and the minister then says, listen, you have to vote for me, when these are basic rights? I mean, it happens especially with the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable, especially people with different abilities. According to statistics, are the most at risk of abuse, the most at risk of poverty, the most likely to be given inferior treatment, the most likely to be given or to reach adequate education. So we should protect them. The government is duty bound to help minimize the disadvantage of these people, not maximize it. These rights should be available. These people should not be begging for their rights, for medication, for housing, for jobs. These are rights. We started the last term, the last school term. There are 180 autistic children who have not yet gone to school this scholastic year. And education is a basic right. The government knows that these people are the most disadvantaged, and yet, instead of minimizing that disadvantage, he's maximizing it. If you're not giving these children their basic right to education, you're not going to help them grow and eventually help them find a job and be self-sufficient.
Louise Police was born in Natal in 1974. She is a lawyer by profession and holds a master's degree in human rights and democracy. Louise was brought up in the village of Zabbar. She is married and has 2 children. She has a genuine interest in the future of Malta, and for this reason, she decided to contest the European Parliament elections. Her interests lie in the protection of democracy and the rule of law, and she champions enforcement initiatives where they are required. She aims to raise awareness to protect vulnerable persons with laws that safeguard the rights of those with different abilities, especially those with psychological disabilities. Louise also wishes to raise awareness on mental health issues with laws that protect the rights of these individuals. The environment and sustainable development are close to her heart.
Thanks for listening. This is Louise Police. I'm one of the candidates for the upcoming MEP elections on behalf of the Nationalist Party. If you want to contact me, I'm always available. Please don't forget to vote for all the candidates on the list of the Nationalist Party. Thank you.
Signori, dik kienet intervista qasira bl-Ingliż ma' Dr. Louise Police li hija kandidata għall-elezzjoni tal-Parlament Ewropew. Pas-soltu tistgħu tibagħtu il-messaġġi tagħkom, il-kummenti fuq in-numru li jidher fuq l-iskrin, imma tistgħu tagħmlu kuntatt mal-kandidati dirett. Tistgħu issibu wkoll l-informazzjoni tagħhom fuq il-paġni tal-Facebook. Issa sa ngħaddu għall-intervista oħra ukoll bil-Ingliż biex inleħqu il-messaġġ għal dawk li jippreferu il-lingwa Ingliża u sa nintaqgħu ma' Norma Camilleri. Thank you very much, Norma, for joining our program today.
My pleasure.
How is it going with your campaign?
It's very busy, as expected. I try and fit in a lot of things over and above my full-time job as well, my profession. So it is tough, but it is very interesting as well.
So, I mean, you're from Gozo. Do you visit Malta and Gozo?
Yes. So I have to split the time between Malta and Gozo because for me it is very important that I listen to both. Gozo is different to Malta. A lot of people, when we talk about policies, about our country, they think that the situation is the same for both Malta and Gozo, whereas it's not. Malta is an island, but Gozo is a separate island which relies on Malta for certain things, and the difficulties that Gozatans encounter are different to those that Maltese encounter. And that is, I think, one of the most interesting aspects of the campaign, listening to others and realizing how many people there are that go through so many difficulties. Because of my profession, I was already aware of these difficulties, especially health-related issues, social issues, but now it's even more accentuated.
For those viewers who are watching us and don't know much about you, you were born in Gozo and moved to Malta, now live in St. Julian's. Is it important for you that you know both islands very well?
I always felt, even from university, my university years, I used to feel that in spite of all the difficulties, there was an opportunity, and there still is an opportunity for us Gozitans, because the fact that we have to leave our home and go to another island and find an apartment and fend for yourself and be independent for 5 days a week before going back home for the weekend. I think that is an opportunity that helps you grow, which Maltese students don't have that opportunity. Obviously, it comes along with challenges, and transportation challenges are still there, even though we are in 2024, but there's the issues of connectivity, reliability on the ferry, on the fast ferry, on the public transport, the opportunities they have in also, for example, doing exams in Gozo rather than coming over. When it comes to internet, there still are difficulties in Gozo. Traffic, which is much heavier than it was in my university days 30 years ago or so. And moreover, I live in St. Julian's, so I don't live in a village similar to Gozo. It's like, I don't know, Abba, Rendi or Siġġiewi, but in St. Julian's, where it is very heavily populated, the amount of construction is unbearable at times. So I think I get to look at both extremes. So, for example, very recently we had the issue of the farmers. Farmers have an additional burden because to purchase the raw material, they need to come over to Malta to buy whatever they need. And the transportation, it's not that cheap. Gozo ferry ticket costs €8.15. But it's not just €8.15. It can cost up to €100. Then apart from the fuel and apart from the time you have to spend in the traveling. So the Gozitan context is different. Businesses, in different industries and enterprises. So yes, we're talking about a smaller island, a smaller niche market, a smaller population, which has its own needs and exigencies. And we mustn't forget how important it is to preserve and maintain the identity and culture of Gozo. And when you communicate, when you dialogue with different stakeholders, with different organizations, you can get all the information that you need of what really works, what doesn't, what is required, what is redundant, and what is not so important. And that's why communication is so important in any policy making, in any aspect.
Norma, mental health is very close to your heart. How do you think the European Union can help with mental health in our country?
I like talking about mental health because when you think about it, mental health is not something in isolation. It's not whether you have a mental health problem, a mental disorder or not. But it is so vast. Even if we were just to look at the different things that affect mental health. The environment affects mental health. How much space do we have? The pollution, what's the quality of the air that we are breathing? Is there too much light? Do we have light pollution? What about noise pollution? That is something which we barely talk about it, and it is something that really affects mental health. The economy. If you're working 1 or 2 jobs to make ends meet, is it enough? Can you get by with just one job? Recently, in the World Happiness Report, we saw how, unfortunately, our youths are amongst the unhappiest in the European Union. And I did speak to some youths, to young people, and they told me that one of the reasons that they work a lot, most students even have a part-time job, some even manage a full-time job alongside their full-time studies, whereas other young people have a full-time job and a part-time job, and sometimes even something extra in addition, because they find it so difficult to take a loan, to buy a property, to rent a property, and they look forward to living an independent life from their family, not because they're fed up of their family, but because they want to be independent, and rightly so, because they are adults. And all of this adds on to the difficulties in mental health, because they find it difficult to make ends meet.
They feel the burden,
anxiety, lack of sleep. We need to express ourselves, and that's another problem. You asked me what I would do. I think one of the things we really need to work on is to combat this stigma that there is around mental health.
And there is still a stigma,
in
spite of what people say.
Yes, definitely.
And how much awareness is raised.
There's lack of awareness,
still a stigma.
lack of respect. I was just reading a post on social media recently, and someone was pointing out how much we are lacking etiquette. For instance, even if you go on a bus and you see an elderly person or a pregnant woman, you wouldn't even think twice, or you would just get up and give your place to another.
I think those days are gone.
Those days are
Not
way
in
gone. yes, it's
yes.
definitely part of its history.
Yes.
Unfortunately, very sadly. Where's the police? Where's the thank you? Where is it? Is it possible? No, unfortunately, we live in a culture where we expect more and more. We live in a culture of greed, unfortunately.
What about construction? How does that impact mental health, in your opinion?
Some people may think that I am totally against construction and that we don't need construction anymore. First and foremost, let's look at the buildings we have. Are they truly all full? We do know that there are a lot of buildings that are empty. Secondly, what about the aesthetics of the building? Are we taking into consideration the village core, the aesthetics of the village or the towns? Simple rules such as when to do the works, when to start, and precautions. Enforcement, is it there? Are we really paying attention that whoever is in construction follows the rules, that they follow the times, that they put the netting if there is excessive dust? I think we have a lot of work to do when it comes to enforcement to ensure that we respect the residents. Nowadays, rather than paying more attention to the type of buildings that we build and type of the quality of the residences, is the quantity. How many flats am I going to fit in one floor? And the result was that during COVID, when people were obliged to work from home and children were doing schooling from home, not large families, because we no longer have so many large families, even a family of 2 children, they barely had their own space to be able to do online schooling in a quiet place.
They were on top of each other.
And I think that all of that adds on to difficulties with mental health, apart from the fact what we mentioned, the stigma, that unfortunately a lot of people think that they need to hit rock bottom before calling out for help, before seeking help.
There's still a stigma, especially in the workplace. People will not share that they have a problem with mental health, and perhaps that's something that needs to be attended to, I think.
Yeah, and the fact even, this is an interesting topic, because I strongly believe that employers should be given the tools to recognize certain red lights. Same thing when it comes to hidden disabilities, that educators and employers should know how to look out for certain things. So if I am talking to someone and I tell them to do X and they do A, not Y, they do A, and they do it repeatedly, day after day, I should be questioning, are you really understanding what I am telling you? Do you have a problem with comprehension? But unfortunately, when there is lack of communication and lack of respect, some people just jump to conclusions. You are unproductive, you are not fit for this job, I'm sorry, you have to look elsewhere. Whereas sometimes it could be that that person might have a hidden disability that was never diagnosed. And this is a fact. There's research, especially in the UK, that shows that people, juvenile inmates, in certain institutions, over 60% of them had a communication problem that was never diagnosed. And that unfortunately led them to take an unwanted path in their life.
Our time is drawing to a close. I always enjoy speaking to you, Norma.
Same here.
Just before we close for today, why do you think people should turn up to vote in the forthcoming election? A lot of people don't seem enthusiastic.
Yes, and unfortunately a lot of people don't see the importance of the elections of the European Parliament. And when you think about it, so you asked me about what would you do, the policies. I referred to the local context, but obviously that's because the local context is what interests me. So if I am in the European Parliament, I will do my utmost to see that any policies that are made reflect in a positive way for our country. And that is why it's very important that people take these elections seriously, because it's very important that they choose the right people to represent them. And that is why it is very important that on the 8th of June, people go out, they vote for both the local council elections, the European Parliament elections, and they vote for all candidates.
Norma Camilleri is a speech-language pathologist and voice coach. She has been active in the voluntary sector in different leadership roles for more than 30 years. She is currently president of 2 voluntary organizations, a local one and a European one. Norma firmly believes that strong values and principles are the pillars of a healthy and just society. In particular, she advocates for accessible health services, mental wellness, social justice, early diagnosis and help for individuals with disabilities, as well as preservation of our cultural heritage. Norma was born and raised in Shara Gozo, and for the last 30 years she has been a resident of St. Julian's. She is married with 1 daughter. Norma also has performing arts and sports at heart. She studied piano and singing and took part in several performances. She also enjoys running and swimming.
The 8th of June will be a very important day. You will have the opportunity to choose your next representatives at the European Parliament. You will have the opportunity to choose your representatives within your local councils. We all know what our country has been through in the past years, so I encourage you to really evaluate the situation, and I am sure that you will come to the conclusion that it is your right to take the decision yourselves and not let others vote on your behalf. So on the 8th of June, I encourage you to go to your polling booth and vote for the Nationalist Party candidates for both the local council elections and the European Parliament elections. And don't forget to vote for all candidates.
Signori, grazzi li qed issegwu l-programm illum. Illum intqajna ma' żewġ kandidati tal-elezzjoni tal-Parlament Ewropew ma' Louise Pulis u Norma Camilleri. Tistgħu tagħmlu kuntatt magħhom dirett jew tibagħtu messaġġ permezz tal-WhatsApp fuq in-numru li jidher fuq l-iskrin. Inħeġġiġkom passoltu biex tivvutaw għal kandidati tal-Partit Nazzjonalista. Sa nifqu għal waqfa qasira jiena Lejja Hogg għal Net TV.